The second year I liked Jaden, I decided to give up. I changed my seat, stopped talking to him, and kept my distance. Just then, the boy next door, who was more of an equal to me, transferred to our school. I started going to school and coming home with him, inseparable. Someone jokingly asked Jaden, "Jaden, that difficult Princess Adela has finally given up on you and found a new target. How do you feel about that?" Jaden didn't answer. It wasn't until I withdrew from the club I had joined for him that he finally looked at me coldly and asked, "Adela, do you rich families always act so selfish, always chasing after fleeting interests?" Before Easton transferred here, I was already preparing to give up on Jaden. Honestly, it was just a momentary decision. That day, I was standing by the back door of the club when I overheard someone joking with Jaden. "Jaden, why bother studying so hard? Does Adela like you? Do you know her background? She donated a whole building to the school when she first came in. Worried she wouldn't get used to the cafeteria, her dad even built her a private one, with Michelin star chefs. I heard she's an only child. If she likes you, you've got it made, no need to work for the next 60 years. Yeah, and you're still ignoring her. Are you out of your mind? You really don't like her, do you?" After a long pause, I finally heard Jaden's cold voice, laced with deep irritation. He said, "Yes, I hate her. I'd rather work for another 80 years than take her shortcut." Laughter erupted, loud and exaggerated, filled with mocking jeers. I stood outside, silently, for several seconds, then lowered my hand from the door handle and turned to leave. To be honest, before I heard this conversation, I had no idea Jaden hated me so much. I kept replaying his words in my mind, the disgust in his voice. What had I done to make him despise me so much? I admit I liked Jaden. Who doesn't have a crush on the handsome, smart guy in school during their teenage years? But I never pursued him obsessively or bothered him. I simply helped him a few times in small ways. The first time I saw him was actually on the school's honor wall. My dad dropped me off and casually pointed to Jaden's photo in the bulletin board, saying, "The top student in your school is pretty handsome, this guy." I followed my dad's gaze, and my first impression of Jaden was that he was a very handsome, brilliant student. Later, when I went to class, I realized we were in the same class. My dad was happy to see him and patted Jaden on the shoulder, giving him a thumbs up, saying, "The top student on the honor wall, huh? Impressive." As Jaden's peer, I actually didn't like people who were overly familiar with strangers. My dad always had no sense of boundaries. When he was young and working as a salesman, he could chat with anyone, even stray dogs, for an hour. I shyly smiled at Jaden to apologize for the intrusion, but he looked at me coldly. He wasn't upset about being interrupted, he just smiled politely at my dad and thanked him courteously. This scene must have caught the teacher's eye, and so they decided to seat me and Jaden together. At first, our relationship was fine. He would explain problems to me, and during gym class, he'd drag me across the 800-meter finish line when I was ready to collapse. Sometimes during break, I'd ask him to grab me a bottle of water from the school store, and occasionally when I snuck reading a novel under my desk, he'd cover for me. But after class, he would always complain, "Adela, you're so lazy and useless. Your grades are bad, your stamina is terrible. What are you going to do with your life?" Then, he'd proceed to teach me more lessons, his face cold. I would just laugh it off, looking at him and say, "Aren't you here for me? If I fail, I'll just come to you for help. I'll cling to you so tightly you won't be able to shake me off." Jaden would look at me quietly, his amber eyes like a cat's eye marble, the kind that could pull you in if you stared for too long. I would inexplicably blush, stumbling over my words. A fleeting smile passed across Jaden's face before he returned to his usual serious expression and went back to explaining. Before anyone knew my dad was the richest man in a city, Jaden and I were like any other friendly desk mates. He started distancing himself from me probably after the post titled "Digging into Adela's Family Background" spread. The post revealed that the building in the new school block had been donated by my dad, and that the cheap but good cafeteria in the West District had been built specifically for me. The low prices were because my dad personally funded it. Also, when the cafeteria was crowded, there was a private room reserved for me, only open when I ate there, always closed when I wasn't there. Some of the details were exaggerated. My dad donated the building because he values culture and education, coming from a poor background himself and understanding the importance of learning. The cafeteria wasn't built just for me, but because he thought students needed proper nutrition. When he was younger, his family couldn't afford food, and he wanted students today to avoid the hardships he went through. The post went viral, and many of my classmates started asking me, "Adela, is that post true?" It made me really frustrated. So I went to Jaden to complain. He was sitting next to me, reading quietly. Jaden was very smart and could multitask. I didn't dare interrupt him when he was studying, but he said it was fine, that these simple problems and my trivial complaints were nothing for him to handle. One day, I asked him a question while he was solving a big math problem, and he answered calmly, solving complex equations while speaking to me. But that day, after I finished talking, he suddenly cut me off impatiently, his voice cold. "Don't bother me, okay?" My words froze in my throat, and I felt a little hurt. But I paused for a moment and apologized. "Sorry, is this problem really that hard? I won't bother you anymore." But even when he wasn't working, whenever I tried to talk to him, his attitude was distant. Gradually, I stopped talking to him. Then we fell into some kind of inexplicable Cold War. It was childish, he wouldn't talk to me, so I wouldn't talk to him. It felt like we were both acting like little kids fighting. But Jaden had never been one to express himself much, so it was probably only me who was hurt. Our relationship completely soured when the teacher announced a class donation for Jaden. Before this, I never really knew about Jaden's family situation. He was well dressed in the school uniform, handsome, with excellent grades and graceful manners, so it was hard to imagine he came from a single-parent family, with his mother suffering from kidney disease and needing expensive dialysis every month. The teacher stood at the podium and said, "Jaden is exceptionally talented. Despite coming from such a tough background, he's still maintaining outstanding grades." After learning about his situation, the school has decided to organize a donation drive to help Jaden's family. We hope everyone can show unity and compassion to help our outstanding student through this difficult time. Jaden is well liked by everyone. He's hardworking, talented, mature, and good-looking, so people often express their regret and turn to look at him. I felt a little down hearing that, not really caring whether I was still in a Cold War with Jaden. I turned toward him and asked quietly, "Why never mention this before?" He lowered his head to read, his lips pressed tightly together, not saying a word. At that moment, I didn't think much about it. After all, Jaden and I were friends, well, at least I thought we were, based on my one-sided assumption. I hadn't considered his pride or anything like that. I just wanted to help him solve his problem. So, I went to my dad for help. My dad acted quickly, even without needing the school's donations. He covered all of Jaden's expenses from high school to university, and had Jaden's mom transferred to a private hospital with all the costs going through his account. The day Jaden and his mom came to thank my dad was a weekend. My dad and I had just returned from outside, and they were standing outside the archway of our villa. The sun was beating down, and as soon as my dad got out of the car, Jaden's mom burst into tears, overwhelmed with emotion. She wanted to thank my dad for his help. Jaden, still in his school uniform, comforted his mom while my dad awkwardly hugged her. Jaden's mom grabbed my dad's hand and said, "From now on, Jaden is your person. You can ask him to do anything." I stood behind my dad, frozen and unsure of what to do. As I glanced at Jaden, he also looked up and met my gaze. His eyes were deep, like an abyss, unyielding and bottomless. He just stared at me. For some reason, at that moment, I felt something had changed in Jaden. Though he had always been composed and mature, there had been times when I could still sense the youthful energy in him. But now that energy seemed gone. What stood out was his mature composure, and he had become even more silent. It was only later that I realized, maybe he didn't want me around at that moment. Afterward, I tried hard to mend my relationship with Jaden. I brought him breakfast every morning, bought him drinks after class. I used to do the same even before I became Adela, and Jaden never turned me down. But after I became Adela, he stopped accepting these things. It felt as though accepting them was like accepting charity. But these were just simple, friendly gestures between friends and desk mates. What could a breakfast or a bottle of water possibly cost? I bought him a pair of shoes for his birthday, but he didn't accept them either. Soon, rumors spread that I had a crush on Jaden. I never denied it, nor did I explain it, because honestly, I couldn't claim to be open with him. Besides, I thought that Jaden had at least liked me at some point. After all, the way he had treated me before, his patience and care, seemed like a unique exception. Then, one day, I overheard him talking to someone outside the rock climbing club. He said, "Yes, I really hate her." Fine. Even though I wanted to fix things with Jaden, I also knew that a gentleman doesn't force things. If he hated me, then that was that. So, I decided to move on, to let my heart be like bamboo, swaying with the wind but still standing firm when the breeze subsides. He hated me. Then, I wouldn't let myself like him anymore. When Jaden returned, I was already sitting calmly in my seat. I didn't try to speak to him again. Ever since the day his mom thanked my dad, I had been the one desperately trying to find conversation topics with him, no matter how cold he was toward me. But now, I didn't feel like talking. I've never been much of a hothead. Since I was little, I've been cheerful and easygoing, rarely getting into arguments. All my elders said I had a good temperament. But even the best-tempered person has their limits. When Jaden sat down, I even shifted a little, putting some space between us. Jaden seemed to stiffen, and I could feel his confused glance in my direction. But I kept my head down, reading, and didn't look at him. During math class, I zoned out for a moment, and when the teacher was analyzing a problem, she called on me to answer. I hesitated as I looked at the problem on the board, unsure. Jaden quietly pushed his notebook over to me, placing it right in front of my eyes. Our little exchange didn't escape the teacher's notice, but she didn't say anything. Jaden had written each step clearly, almost as if he thought I wouldn't understand. I paused, then looked up at the teacher and said, "Sorry, I didn't understand." The teacher was briefly taken aback, before saying, "I'll explain it again. Everyone else, pay attention. Don't zone out, learning is your responsibility." As I sat back down, I saw Jaden's hand tighten around his pen. He must have been squeezing it hard, because his knuckles turned white. After a while, he silently pulled his notebook back from me. I didn't say anything to him. We stayed like that until the bell rang. I was a little sad inside, even though I had made up my mind. Jaden still sat beside me, his presence so strong it was hard to ignore. I thought, maybe after some time, I could talk to the teacher and request a seat change, to stop sitting next to Jaden. I just needed to come up with a good reason that didn't seem too obvious. Lost in my thoughts, I was suddenly snapped back to reality when someone knocked on the window next to me, saying someone was looking for me. The two girls knocking on the window winked and said, "Wow, Adela, it's a handsome guy. You should go out." I was confused. But when I stepped out and saw who was standing in the corridor outside the classroom, I froze. He was tall, leaning against the wall in a white shirt, not in his school uniform. His face was calm, his eyes clear and bright. People passing by kept looking at him curiously, but he remained perfectly composed, never looking their way. When I, curious, glanced up at him, a faint smile appeared on his lips. He softly called my name, "Adela." I squealed and rushed over to him, grabbing his arm excitedly. "Easton. When did you get back?" He looked down at me, smiling gently. "Just a week ago. I had some things to take care of. I only finished transferring today. I'm your senior from now on, so I came to say hello." I was so excited. "Transfer? Did your parents come back too?" He smiled at my enthusiasm. "Yes, this time we're settling down for good. No more going abroad." I beamed at him, overjoyed. Easton used to live next door when we were kids. At that time, my dad had just started his business and was always busy. He would leave me in the care of our neighbor, Easton's mom, Amity. Sometimes, when Amity went out, it was Easton who looked after me. Even though we were about the same age, I still have an old photo album with a picture of him standing by my crib, feeding me with a bottle. Later, he'd take me tree climbing, make up stories, and take me out to play, just like an older brother would. Our families had been neighbors for years, and we were very close. Then, 5 years ago, when Easton's dad got promoted, they moved abroad. I cried for days, and when he was leaving, I went to the airport with my dad. I remember holding onto his sleeve, not wanting to let go, and nearly making him miss his flight. Later on, he often sent me things, and we kept in touch off and on. But over the past 2 years, it hasn't been as frequent as before. I never expected him to suddenly come back to the country. It must be because Easton's dad got promoted again. Actually, I contacted your dad a month ago, but I didn't want him to tell you. I wanted to surprise you by suddenly appearing in front of you, he said with a smile, patting my head. Alright, go back to class. I still have some paperwork to do. I'll pick you up after school and we'll go home together. I nodded, reluctantly letting go of him when the bell rang, and walked toward the classroom. On my way back to my seat, I couldn't wipe the smile off my face. I glanced over at my seat, and, unexpectedly, I locked eyes with Jaden, who had just looked away from the window. He was staring at me with an icy expression, colder than when we'd been in a Cold War before. He just kept looking at my smile, his face expressionless. I froze for a moment, and even when I got close to him, he didn't move. My seat was behind him, and since he didn't move, I couldn't get through. I said, Jaden, could you please move? He didn't respond, still looking down, unmoving. He had never acted like this before. I didn't know what had upset him, or what I had done to make him angry. The bell had already rung for the second time, and the teacher was about to come. I was getting anxious, so I raised my voice and said, Jaden. He suddenly smiled, lightly, almost mockingly. Finally willing to talk to me? He leaned forward slightly, allowing me to pass and sit down, before the teacher arrived. His behavior was unusual. I looked at Jaden again, but he had already turned his gaze back forward, his demeanor back to normal. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, but after thinking it over, I swallowed my question. Never mind. Forget it, it's not my business, I won't ask. Easton became my senior, and it felt like stepping back 5 years. Back then, he used to come to my house every morning to wait for me so we could go to school together, and after class, he would pick me up at the door of my classroom to walk home with me. Every time Easton waited for me at the classroom door, the girls in my class would gasp dramatically, then excitedly tease me, saying, Your Easton is here again. Of course, some would gossip and ask, what's your relationship with Easton? I would sigh and explain, he lives next door to me, just came back from abroad. He's like my brother, so don't make up nonsense. But when I said that, it seemed to make everyone even more excited, and they would stretch out their voices, Oh, so you grew up together? Is Easton from a rich family? He's handsome, and so rich, Adela, you two must be a perfect match. I didn't know what to say. Even though I had said countless times that Easton and I were just friends, no one believed it. Crack. The pen in Jaden's hand broke in half, spilling blue ink all over his hand. The girls in front of me exchanged glances, and the teasing quieted down, until Jaden expressionlessly said, Could you move? I'm going to wash my hands. When he came back after washing his hands, the classmates who had been teasing me dispersed. Jaden looked at me and coldly said, Could you two gossip somewhere else? It's too noisy. Whether I was passive or active, it's always bad to disturb others, so I lowered my head and apologized, Sorry. Jaden stared at me, surprised. His cold expression softened a little. He parted his lips, seeming like he wanted to say something, but for some reason, he didn't. I could tell he kept looking at me, as if lost in thought. After a moment, I looked up at him and mustered the courage to say, It's not good for you to be disturbed while studying every day. I'll ask the teacher to change my seat. When Jaden heard this, his gaze turned cold again, and his eyebrows furrowed. After a long time, he coldly said, Do whatever you want. The next day, I moved seats. The teacher asked if there was a conflict with my classmates. I thought for a moment and explained that I didn't want to disturb Jaden's studies. Jaden was the teacher's prized student, and since it involved his grades, the teacher agreed easily. He asked where I wanted to sit. Jaden's seat was by the window on the left. He liked the sunlight and breeze. After thinking, I asked the teacher to move me to the farthest seat on the right, by the classroom hallway. Now we were 6 rows apart, and I thought Jaden would be happy about the distance. His seat next to him was always empty. When the teacher asked who he would like to sit next to, he coldly refused, saying he preferred sitting alone. The teacher let him be. My new deskmate was a noisy little chubby boy who enthusiastically gossiped with me. Compared to him, I was practically mute. He even shared cakes and chocolates he kept in his desk with me. He was a lot warmer than Jaden's cold, stone-faced demeanor. But even though I sat far away from Jaden, I still felt out of place, like a huge empty space in my heart. The only time I could freely stare at his straight back was when the teacher called him up to the board to solve a problem in 3 different ways. After we stopped sitting together, Jaden and I became like the most familiar strangers. Oh, and I even withdrew from the club I had joined for him. I didn't like rock climbing. I had joined just to get closer to him. On the day I quit the club, Jaden wore a glaringly sarcastic look. Everyone else in the club went silent, watching us without daring to speak. Jaden asked, "Do you always do whatever you want, with no perseverance, just a fleeting interest?" Before I could answer, he handed me the resignation form coldly, saying, "Sign it and give it back to me." I silently took it from him. After that, we didn't have any more interaction. Time passed, and my sadness gradually healed, leaving me carefree and laughing all day. Then, Sigrid transferred to our school. Sigrid had been recruited by the principal from another school. The first time I saw her, she was standing at the front of our class introducing herself. Her image matched the typical overachiever: short, neat hair, and an aura of confidence. After finishing her introduction, she smiled and directly met Jaden's eyes, greeting him, "Jaden, long time no see." I felt a strange tightening in my chest. Sigrid became Jaden's new deskmate. They must have met many times at competitions and shared a lot of common topics, which was why they were so familiar with each other. Every break, when I happened to glance over, I could see them whispering to each other. Sometimes, Jaden furrowed his brows, and other times, a faint smile tugged at his lips. During the first exam after Sigrid joined, the classmates made a bet to see whether Jaden or Sigrid would score higher. When the results came out, Jaden won, though the gap between them was very small. In every subject, they were nearly tied, both close to full marks. He often sent me things, and we kept in touch intermittently, though over the past 2 years, it definitely wasn't as frequent as before. I never expected him to suddenly come back to the country. It must be because Easton's dad got promoted again. "Actually, I contacted your dad a month ago. I didn't want him to tell you, so I could surprise you by showing up in front of you." He smiled, patting my head. "All right, go back to class. I still have some paperwork to take care of. I'll pick you up after school, and we can go home together." I nodded, reluctantly letting go of his hand as the bell for class rang, and walked back to the classroom. On the way back to my seat, I couldn't stop smiling. I looked up and glanced at my seat, only to unexpectedly meet Jaden's cold gaze through the window. His expression was icy, even worse than when we had been in a Cold War. He stood there, staring at my smile with an unreadable face. I froze for a second, and by the time I walked past him, he hadn't moved. My seat was on the inside, and since he didn't move, I couldn't get in. "Jaden, could you move, please?" I asked. He ignored me, keeping his head down and standing still. He'd never acted like this before, and I had no idea what had upset him or why he was so cold toward me. The bell rang for the second time, and the teacher was about to arrive. I was getting anxious, so I raised my voice a little, saying, "Jaden." He suddenly smiled, a light and somewhat mocking smile. Finally willing to talk to me? Then he leaned forward, allowing me to walk past him and sit down before the teacher arrived. His behavior was odd. I turned to look at Jaden, but he was already looking straight ahead, his usual cool demeanor back. I wanted to ask what was going on, but then I thought better of it and swallowed my questions. "Forget it. It's none of my business. I won't ask." Easton had become my senior, and it felt like we had gone back 5 years in time. Back then, he would wait for me outside my house every morning to go to school with me, and after class, he would wait at the door to pick me up and we'd go home together. Every time Easton waited for me outside the classroom, the girls in the class would exaggerate with "Wow," and excitedly tease me, saying, "Your Easton is here again." Of course, some of them would gossip, asking, "What's your relationship with Easton?" I'd sigh and explain, "He lives next door to me and just came back to the country. He's like a brother to me. Please don't make a big deal of it." But explaining it only seemed to make them more excited, stretching out their words, "So you grew up together? That means Easton's family must be well off? He's so handsome and rich, Adela, you two are perfect for each other." I didn't know how to respond. Even though I'd explained countless times that Easton and I were just friends, no one believed me. Snap. Jaden snapped his pen in half, and blue ink spilled all over his hands. The girls in front of me exchanged glances, and the teasing quieted down. Finally, Jaden, with an unreadable face, said, "Could you move aside? I need to wash my hands." When he came back after washing up, the group of students teasing me had dispersed. Jaden looked at me and flatly said, "Could you gossip somewhere else or at least change the place? It's too noisy." Whether I was passive or active, I knew it wasn't good to disturb others, so I lowered my head and apologized. "Sorry." Jaden looked at me, surprised, and his usual cold expression softened a little. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but for some reason, he didn't. I could feel him staring at me, lost in thought. After a moment, I looked up at him and, gathering my courage, said, "I know it's not good to disturb you while you're studying, so I'll ask the teacher to move me to another seat." When Jaden heard this, his gaze turned cold again, and his expression stiffened. He stared at me without saying a word for a long time, before finally replying coldly, "Do whatever you want." The next day, I switched seats. The teacher, a little worried, asked if I had a conflict with a classmate. After thinking for a moment, I explained that I didn't want to disturb Jaden's studying. Jaden was the teacher's precious student, and since it involved his grades, the teacher immediately agreed. He asked me where I wanted to sit, and since Jaden's seat was by the window on the left side, where he liked the sunlight and breeze, I thought for a moment and asked the teacher to move me to the farthest right, near the hallway. Easton on the left, Jaden on the right, 6 rows apart. This way, I thought Jaden would be pleased. His seat next to him had been empty. When the teacher asked him who he'd prefer as a deskmate, he coldly refused, saying he preferred to sit alone. So the teacher let him have his way. My new deskmate was a chubby, talkative boy. He eagerly gossiped with me, and compared to him, I spoke much less. He also shared the cake and chocolate he kept in his desk drawer. It was much better than Jaden's cold, fish-like expression. But even though I was sitting far from Jaden, I still felt a sense of emptiness inside, like something was missing. Only when the teacher asked Jaden to go up and write 3 different solutions for an example problem could I daydream while watching his straight-backed figure. Jaden and I had reached a point where we were like the most familiar strangers. Oh, and I even withdrew from the club I had joined just to get closer to him. I didn't like rock climbing, but I joined the club to be near him. When I went to withdraw from the club, Jaden mocked me openly. The other club members held their breath and watched, not daring to speak. Jaden asked, "Do you just do whatever you feel like, always switching interests after 3 minutes?" Before I could respond, he handed me the withdrawal form and coldly said, "Sign it and give it to me." I silently took it. After that, we had no more interaction. Days passed, and my sadness slowly healed, turning into a carefree, silly demeanor, smiling mindlessly all day. That is, until Sigrid transferred in. Sigrid had been specially recruited by the principal from another school. The first time I saw her was when she stood on the podium in our class to introduce herself. She matched the image of a top student perfectly, her short hair was neat and tidy, and her whole presence was impressive. After her introduction, she smiled and directly met Jaden's gaze, greeting him, "Jaden, long time no see." A strange, tight feeling gripped my chest. Sigrid became Jaden's new deskmate. They must have met many times at competitions and had a lot of common topics, which is probably why they were so familiar with each other. Every break, when I accidentally glanced over, I would see them quietly discussing something. Sometimes Jaden frowned, and other times, he had a slight smile on his lips. During Sigrid's first exam, the class placed a bet to see who would score higher, Jaden or Sigrid. When the results came out, Jaden won, but their scores were very close. Jaden had no weak subjects. The other students got their test papers the next day, but Jaden, as the math representative, distributed them. My paper was the one he handed out. When he reached my desk, I felt like he paused for a moment before placing my paper on my desk. I've never been great with my grades. To be honest, I've never really cared about my scores. Even my dad never placed much importance on my studies, he just wants me to live a happy life. But for some reason, as I looked at my test paper, I suddenly felt a bit ashamed and frustrated, especially with Jaden right there watching. As expected, I heard Jaden's mocking voice. He said, "Are you seriously planning to use this kind of score to get into college?" This was the first time he spoke to me since we stopped sitting together. I silently folded my test paper and tucked it into my book, clearly not in the mood to talk. But for some reason, Jaden didn't leave. He stood by my desk and said, "If there's anything you don't understand, you can ask me." After a pause, he explained again, "I'm receiving financial support from your dad, so if there's something you don't get, you can come to me for help." I didn't respond. Jaden, for some reason, seemed a little angry. He raised his voice and said, "Wasting your potential, not working hard, are you planning to live off your dad your whole life?" I finally looked up at him, feeling angry for the first time. "What's it to you? Whether I rely on myself or my dad, what's it got to do with you? Who are you to judge me?" He paused for a moment, his dark eyes locking onto mine, a flicker of disappointment crossing them. Then, without saying another word, he turned and walked away. On the way home that evening, I stayed silent, distractedly kicking stones. Easton noticed and asked if something was bothering me. I shook my head and said no. But then Easton asked what my plans for the future were. I stared at him blankly. Easton smiled and said, "I'm planning to study abroad. After this year's exams, I'll be heading overseas. I've already mentioned it to your dad. If you come with me, I can look out for you until you graduate." He smiled gently at me, then patted my head and said, "He's thought about it too, but just hasn't brought it up. You should think about it." I felt a little down and asked, "Am I really that bad?" He laughed, his hand gently landing on my head to ruffle my hair. "No way," he said seriously, meeting my eyes. "Everyone has their own strengths and skills. Yours just aren't in academics." I sighed. I talked to my dad about it when I got home. He did have that idea. Initially, he didn't feel comfortable with me going abroad alone, but with Easton there, he felt much better about it. I felt a little lost. My dad said, "Of course, it's up to you. Honestly, I'd be reluctant to let you go. No matter what your grades are like, I could still get you into a good university. But sometimes I wonder if it's better to let you go on your own and grow independent." He sighed wistfully. I knew what he meant without him saying it out loud. He was worried that, if he wasn't around one day, I wouldn't be independent enough to take care of myself. I said, "Let me think about it, Dad." That night, I lay in bed, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. Finally, just before I drifted off, I remembered Jaden's words, "Are you planning to live off your dad your whole life?" So, at breakfast the next day, I told my dad I wanted to go abroad. I wanted to be independent and experience new things. My dad was sad and reluctant, but more than that, he seemed relieved. I started preparing my applications and the paperwork for studying abroad. I didn't tell anyone else about it. Honestly, it was because I wasn't good at dealing with the emotional atmosphere of goodbyes. Even though I was generally carefree, I always felt awkward in those moments of sadness when it came to leaving. I handled everything while attending classes, though I made more frequent trips to the teacher's office. By the time everything was set, I had little time left to prepare. Sometimes, I thought naively about leaving for abroad without telling Jaden. I imagined that one day, he'd find out I was gone, and maybe he'd regret it. I wondered if he would feel upset or sad. But after thinking it over, I realized that no matter how he felt about me now, he had once cared for me, and I had considered him a friend. It would seem a bit rude to leave without saying anything. I imagined being in his shoes. Even though we weren't on good terms now, if Jaden suddenly left without telling me, I'd probably be upset too. I hesitated until just before my departure. The night before I left, I finally decided to stop by the classroom during lunch break. Jaden was usually there around that time. But when I arrived, I found he wasn't alone. Sigrid was there too. They were standing side by side in front of the blackboard, each holding a piece of chalk, furiously debating over something. The blackboard was covered with math formulas. Sigrid, caught up in the moment, was writing so quickly she didn't notice her foot slip. As she stepped wrong, Jaden immediately warned her to be careful, reaching out to grab her arm and pull her toward him. They were standing so close. I watched them from the window in the hallway, noticing Sigrid's face turning red. After a moment, Jaden let go of her arm, turned his gaze away, and calmly asked, "Are you okay?" Sigrid nodded, and even I, an outsider, could feel the tension between them. The two of them stood silently for a moment before resuming their discussion on the board, almost in perfect synchrony. I paused for a second, then quietly stepped back, retreating from the scene. It was clear that he hadn't noticed all the little things, the reason I'd been going to the teacher's office so often, or that I'd been taking leave. He had a new desk partner, a new friend. They were well matched. I sighed. Whatever. I quietly turned and left, just as quietly as I had come. When I returned to the country, it was already 9 years later. At the time I went abroad, no one expected I would stay there so long. My dad had thought I'd just go to get a better university degree, then return and work in his company. If I liked it, I could take over his business; if not, I could do something I liked, like opening a shop. The idea was that I should do whatever I wanted, as long as I kept myself busy. At university, I met many people who were terrible at academics, but were incredibly skilled in other areas. I got involved in organizing a small art exhibition, thanks to a friend of mine. Her family wasn't wealthy, and the expensive tuition and living costs made it hard for her to even eat sometimes. But her paintings were beautiful, bold, vibrant colors, abstract lines, and eccentric expressions. One day, a sudden idea struck me and a few other friends: we should find a space and hold a small exhibition for her. We picked the paintings, promoted the event on social media, and unexpectedly, it gained some attention. Some of my friends' paintings were even sold for a decent price. From there, my friends and I started focusing on art galleries and art investment. We scout for emerging, lesser-known artists and help promote them through exhibitions and auctions. The value of art typically rises based on the story behind it, so we focus on acquiring paintings with potential, package them up, and sell them for at least 10 times the price. The operation is not very large; some works have great results, while others do not. But overall, it's been going quite well. By the time I was in my junior year, the money I made from it covered my living expenses for the entire year. This gave me a huge sense of accomplishment and satisfaction. After graduation, a few friends and I started an art investment company, and I spent another 2 years abroad. In short, I no longer had to ask my family for money. And then it was time for my dad to constantly urge me to come back. When I first left the country, I was young and would often fantasize about coming back and meeting Jaden. Without fail, my fantasy always involved me returning as a successful person, looking down at Jaden, who would stand in front of me, pained, asking, "Adela, why? Why didn't you tell me when you went abroad? Why?" Every time I thought about it, I would secretly smile, but also feel a bit wistful, because deep down I knew Jaden would never ask me that. My dad would occasionally bring up Jaden. He asked if I remembered my old deskmate. He said Jaden had gone to a prestigious university and that Jaden and his mother had specifically come to thank him. My dad also told me that Jaden had asked about me, but out of respect for my privacy, he never gave Jaden my contact information. Later, Jaden gave my dad his phone number, asking him to pass it on to me in case I needed help. But by then, 3 years had passed, and all my feelings for Jaden had faded. I was immersed in working with a group of friends, scouting out niche artists around the world, and was too distracted to think about him. Eventually, I forgot about it. I never reached out to Jaden, and my dad never gave him my phone number. Of course, I never thought about him again. The only time I'd remember him was when my friends abroad asked if I had ever had a crush on anyone, and I'd vaguely recall him as a person, but not as someone special. After all, it had been 9 years. And when I did think of him, it wasn't about him as a person, but rather the feeling I had when I was young, naive, and awkwardly crushing on someone. So when I saw Jaden again, I was more surprised than anything else. Jaden walked in behind the butler. 9 years had passed, and he had changed quite a bit. He had grown taller and more upright. His once delicate and handsome features had matured, with sharper brows and eyes. The arrogance and isolation that once defined him had softened, and his whole presence had become more grounded and restrained, like a sharp sword sheathed in its scabbard. I knew a little about him. I knew he had started a business in the digital economy after graduation, something related to artificial intelligence, big data, and chips, things I didn't fully understand. I had seen his name on the list of up-and-coming billionaires, ranked among the youngest but highest. He seemed to be lost in thought for a moment, so I decided to greet him first. I smiled, standing in the middle of the living room, looking at him. "Long time no see." He stopped in his tracks, but for some reason, he didn't look in my direction right away. He stood there stiffly, as if frozen, and after a long pause, he finally looked up at me. I met his amber-colored eyes again, like a deep, bottomless pool. I smiled again and said politely, "Are you here to see my dad?" "Thank you. Have you eaten yet?" It was a mere pleasantry, but for some reason, Jaden kept staring at me with those deep, bottomless eyes. After a while, he shook his head. I paused for a moment, then had the staff prepare a simple meal. After Jaden visited my dad, I sat with him at the dining table. He was the guest, and it wouldn't be right to ignore him. He ate slowly, taking his time, while chatting with me as if we were old friends. "When did you come back?" I hesitated for a second. It felt a bit strange, because when Jaden asked me this so naturally, it reminded me of those times 9 years ago when we were still in school. After gym class, he would find me back at my desk, sneakily returning, and he'd ask, "When did you sneak back?" while placing the bottle of water he'd brought me on my desk. I smiled, explaining, "I just came back, not long ago." He said, "Oh," then reached for a bowl of vegetables. He ate a couple of bites before telling me, "I just spoke with your dad. I'm planning to move a business operation back to a city and set up a new company to open up a new market. At first, it will need around 2,000 employees. Your dad has a piece of land in the western suburbs. The location is nice, so I'm thinking of buying it." "You want to buy that land?" I asked, surprised. The plot of land was purchased by my dad at a low price years ago. Initially, it was because of its scenic view and the planned future development nearby. It wasn't too far from the city center, but the government's plans for the area were delayed, and the investment ended up being wasted. Jaden acknowledged this with a nod. I wasn't sure what to say next. Clearly, his involvement was a way of repaying a favor, but I didn't want to be rude either. After all, with his current position and influence, he could certainly make that land worthwhile. So, I said thank you. He responded with another nod. I watched as he twirled another 2 strands of noodles. I remembered how much he used to enjoy noodles. Back then, when we ate in the cafeteria, I could never finish my usual portion, so I would always give him half of what was in my bowl. He always ate it all, no leftovers. Maybe his status had changed, and he no longer liked noodles? Watching him chew slowly, I couldn't help but glance at my watch. It wasn't that I was trying to rush him, but I had a contract to sign soon. Jaden was quick to notice, catching my small movement. He asked, "Got something to do later?" I nodded and told him, "It's about a batch of imported crude oil. My dad made an agreement with them earlier, and they scheduled me to review the contract this afternoon." Jaden furrowed his brows. After a moment of thought, he reminded me of several details to pay attention to. I suddenly understood, and without thinking, I said, "You really know a lot." He paused, then smiled. That smile was like a breath of fresh air, as if an iceberg had melted. Before he could speak, I already knew what he was smiling about. Back when we sat together in class, whenever I had a question, he would patiently explain it to me until I understood. I would always look at him in awe, saying with admiration, "You really know a lot." I smiled too. Now, it felt like there was no distance between us, as though we had returned to the time before any misunderstandings had formed. Time had passed, and the conflicts from the past had been smoothed over. All that remained were the good memories. Jaden finished his noodles quickly, stood up, and said, "All right, you go ahead and handle your business. I'll come by later to talk about the land deal." He ate slowly but left without any unnecessary delays. I checked my watch and headed out the door. Later, when reviewing the contract, my dad's assistant confirmed everything. I recalled the details Jaden had reminded me of, and couldn't help but smile. I then asked the team, and they exchanged confused looks. I smiled and said firmly, "If this detail is missing, we won't approve the contract." Afterward, my dad's assistant kept apologizing, saying he was lucky I brought it up. He explained that he had been so busy recently that he didn't notice something so important. I kept my expression neutral and said, "My dad's been resting lately, and you've been taking care of everything. Make sure you get some good rest after this." He wiped the sweat from his forehead. When I mentioned the incident to my dad that evening, his face darkened. After a long silence, he sighed and said, "He's been with me for 12 years. I didn't respond. Then, my dad changed the subject and looked at me with a proud smile. "You've really grown up. I still remember you as a little girl, sitting in my arms and asking for candy. Now you can stand on your own and even know how to read people." He smiled and asked, Jaden is a good guy. What's going on between you two now? I was genuinely touched by the first part of his words. I hadn't realized how mature, calm, and steady I had become. But when he mentioned Jaden, I was stunned. I asked back, Jaden? What could there possibly be between us? My dad laughed and shook his head. You young people, you really don't get it. After saying that, he seemed ready to rest, so I had no choice but to leave. Standing in the hallway, I stared at the spiraling staircase, feeling a bit lost, as if something was slipping away. I started seeing Jaden more frequently. After my dad started feeling better, he didn't return to the office, but worked from home instead. Since Jaden and I were familiar with each other, he would often come by to meet with my dad. My dad seemed to be trying to teach me, and whenever there was a business deal to discuss, he would have me sit and listen. I usually stayed quiet, observing and listening more than speaking. One day, during dinner, my dad suddenly laughed and asked Jaden, your company has been making big moves recently. With all this going on, how do you still have time to personally oversee the deal for the land in the west suburb? I instinctively glanced at Jaden. After all, as the CEO of a tech company, it did seem a bit overkill for him to be personally involved in a land deal. It felt like a CEO doing logistics and administration work. Jaden paused for a moment but quickly replied without changing his expression, it's crucial for the foundation of the new project, so I need to make sure everything's perfect. My dad smiled and didn't say anything else. Once the main framework of the contract was set, it was up to me to handle the smaller details. Jaden was very generous, not negotiating on price, even offering 40% above the market value for the land. My dad understood that Jaden was repaying him a favor, but in the end, my dad didn't accept the extra money. In a courteous gesture, the premium was converted into stock options for Jaden's company, listed under my name. This made my interactions with Jaden much more frequent. Jaden had changed a lot. Back in school, he was quiet and reserved. I would say 10 things, and he would reply with just one. But now, I often received messages from him. He'd send updates about strange things he saw on the road, business dinners, or his travels abroad. Sometimes he would even send me his dinner or gym workout records. One day, I couldn't resist and asked him, the top newcomer on the rich list, do you have that much free time every day? There was a long pause before he replied with 6 words. Fine. Occasionally, I'd share some of my daily life with him too. He usually replied quickly, and if he took longer than an hour to respond, he'd always explain what he'd been doing. I think I probably knew his schedule better than his assistant. Later, one evening, he invited me to a private gathering at his place. It was just a few close friends, and he asked if I wanted to join. I had some free time, so I decided to go. Jaden's apartment was nothing like I expected. I'd been to many of my friends' homes, and most of them were decorated to match their status and taste. But Jaden's place was large, but almost devoid of any aesthetic sense, typical of a guy with a practical mindset. By the time I arrived, his friends were already there. I recognized some of them as partners from his company. They all greeted me with smiles and remarked, "Ah, finally, the real Adela." I pretended not to understand. I also spotted a familiar face, Sigrid. She was sitting in the middle of the sofa, looking as elegant as the first time I met her, smiling and waving at me, saying, Adela, long time no see. I was momentarily taken aback, but smiled back. I must have made some noise when I entered because Jaden appeared in the kitchen wearing an apron, one knife in each hand. When he saw me, he smiled, greeted me, and then went back to cooking. This private gathering was a little different from what I expected. A group of young, powerful executives were actually cooking dinner themselves. Perhaps this was their way of unwinding. I didn't quite get it, but Sigrid clearly had adapted. Smiling, she said to me, "Don't worry, we don't have to do anything. We'll just help a bit later." I nodded and sat down next to her. Just as I got comfortable, I heard Jaden calling me from the kitchen. I sighed and smiled at Sigrid, who gave me a knowing look, then headed to the kitchen. Jaden was standing there, telling me exactly what to do. I quietly stood next to him, focusing on preparing the ingredients while he chopped vegetables. Every time I looked up, I couldn't help but admire the strong, handsome lines of his profile. He smiled and asked, "Do I look good?" I mumbled a response, and he smiled even more, repeating, "Do I look good?" I nodded and said, "It's quite a good look. Didn't you get voted the most eligible bachelor that unmarried women today would want to marry online?" After a pause, I added with a smile, "No exceptions, you know." Feeling moved? He seemed to choke on his words for a moment before replying, "No." I looked at him, a bit puzzled, as I rinsed some baby bok choy. "What do you mean, no?" He lowered his head and kept chopping vegetables. "No women." I paused, then said softly, "But Sigrid seems pretty great, doesn't she?" His hand froze for a moment, and he looked at me with a strange tilt of his head. "We're just friends," he said. "And besides, she got married right after she graduated from college. She's the one you saw alive when you walked in earlier." Then he asked, "What about you?" "Easton?" I said, "Why do I need to tell you?" He smiled, and his chopping became noticeably harder and louder. "I know without you saying," he said. "A year ago, I saw the wedding photos of him on your Instagram. You were the maid of honor, smiling like a flower." I was surprised. "How do you know my IG account?" He just pursed his lips and kept silent, continuing with the chopping. "Alright, fine, if he won't say anything, I'll wait and see how long he can hold out. I'm not in any rush." After dinner, the men cleaned up and washed the dishes while Sigrid and I lay on the couch, rubbing our full stomachs. Sigrid suddenly winked at me and asked, "Do you want to check out Jaden's collection?" I became interested right away. She led me to Jaden's study. Just as we were about to enter, she seemed to remember something and turned to explain. "Don't misunderstand, I know this place so well, because we often have meetings here." She pointed to a large blackboard on the back wall, covered with a jumble of data I couldn't understand. "Jaden's place is a bit of a mess, but it's perfect for brainstorming." I couldn't help but laugh. Actually, Jaden didn't have a huge collection, just a few trophies and certificates he'd won, a lot of photos from awards ceremonies, and some mementos from his growth. Sigrid pulled out an album and sat with me, flipping through it page by page. When we reached the middle, I stopped suddenly. There was a commemorative photo of Jaden standing in front of my university. His face was expressionless, his eyes cold, but there was a faint trace of sadness. Sigrid noticed me staring at the photo and glanced toward the door. After a moment, she turned back to me and said, "This was during your sophomore year. Jaden came to your university for a 1-week exchange program." She paused, then said seriously, "He came to find you, Adela. I thought he'd find you, but for some reason, when he came back, he was in a slump for a long time. I think it was either because he didn't find you or because you rejected him." She paused again, her voice becoming more serious. "Honestly, I've never liked you much. You didn't even tell Jaden you were going abroad. I felt like you never even considered him a friend. But Jaden always said it was his fault. He said his self-esteem and poverty when he was younger pushed you away, that it was his fault. Over the years, there were many girls who liked him, but his heart was never in it. When he graduated from high school, he got into the university he wanted. We all celebrated. I remember there was a world map in the restaurant where we ate, everyone was so happy, but he stood there, looking at it with a sad tone, asking me, 'Sigrid, how far is it from City A to your country? Can I catch up?' When your childhood friend got married a year ago, that was the first time I saw Jaden smile like that. He said he misunderstood, that maybe his chance had finally come. If it wasn't for the business he had to take care of, I think he would have gone to find you right away. When he first started his business, he worked like he was desperate. We all wondered why he was pushing himself so hard. He said it was because he was like a summer cicada, and the girl he liked was a bird that always flew to places he couldn't reach. The only way he could ever catch up to her was by working harder, harder than anyone else." I listened in a daze until Sigrid looked me up and down, then smiled and asked, "What about you? How do you feel about Jaden? Do you really think he's the cicada?" How do I feel? To be honest, I was a little confused. I had no idea there was so much more to the story. Like the time he gathered the courage to give my dad his phone number, or how he silently followed my Instagram, or how he flew all the way to my university to find me. I had no clue about any of that. Back then, Easton was always around, and I thought maybe Jaden had misunderstood when he saw Easton there. But some things I did know. Like how when my dad got sick, Jaden came to visit him right away. His status and position had changed dramatically. He was a rising star in the market, with all the major banks paying attention to him. And how he reminded me about the contract, helped my family with the land issue, and always kept me in the loop about his schedule, pulling me into his social circle. When Sigrid and I came out of the study, Jaden stood up, looking a bit tense, and asked Sigrid, "What did you show her?" Sigrid smiled casually and said, "Of course, I showed her your embarrassing moments." Jaden laughed, his calm and composed demeanor radiating confidence, the same charismatic air I was familiar with. He sat back down on the sofa and grinned, "Well, let me see them too. I don't remember having any embarrassing moments." The whole room burst into laughter. I watched Jaden through the laughter. His handsome features, the faint smile on his lips. I softly called out, "Jaden." He quickly turned to me, his eyes reflecting my small shadow. He softly said, "What's up?" I smiled, but didn't say anything. Inside, my heart was a storm of emotions, wet, but not dark and oppressive. It felt as if my heart were submerged in water, floating up and down in an unreal way. There was a mix of nostalgia, bitterness, heartache, and regret, in short, a whirlwind of feelings. But it's okay, I thought. It's all right. Things are different now. Jaden and I still have plenty of time. I glanced at Jaden next to me. He was listening to others talk, but subconsciously peeling a nut with his hands. It's one of my favorite snacks, though I never liked the trouble of peeling it. I watched him. Sure enough, once he finished, he instinctively passed it to me on the left. I took it from his hand and saw him naturally reach for another one. From the moment we started high school, this habit of his hadn't changed. I smiled and popped the nut into my mouth. I thought to myself, it's okay. Jaden and I still have plenty of time. I forgave the young Jaden, who once coldly said he hated Adela to protect his pride. I also forgave the one who pushed me further and further away later on. We're even now. We can take our time. Everything is still possible. The winds of youth that began so long ago finally felt like they were roaring today. And,